Whether you choose a comfort cruiser, low-step, trail-ready adventure bike, or city commuter bike, you'll ride further, faster, and more comfortably with Pedigo's Whisper Quiet motor, lightweight battery, and advanced electronics. Go to WTTW.com/sweepstakes for your chance to win.
Shh. You can't ignore me. See, you're still reading. Yo hablo español. Polskie. Watashi wa nihongo ma kana desu. Loud background noises can't stop me. But I don't do this for the fame. I do it for art, for beauty, for cinema. I do it because life is better with subtitles. I do it for you. You're welcome.
We're losing ground
on making Black America.
But at the same time, there is this explosion in Black institutional life.
The places and secret spaces that built Black life.
Tuesday at 9 on WTTW.
Frederick Douglass was born into slavery.
I was a graduate from this peculiar institution with my diploma written on my back.
How did he escape?
Douglass, through and through, was a revolutionary.
And fight for change.
He commands your attention.
Don't miss his courageous journey.
If there is no struggle, there is no progress.
Becoming Frederick Douglass.
Tuesday at 10 on WTTW.
I'm John, and this is my Aunt Lorraine, and you're watching WTTW.
Tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight, Week in Review, is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr and the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer, supporting quality journalism.
Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guest in just a moment, but first some of today's top stories. Early voting for the November midterm is now underway in Chicago. The Loop Super Site at 191 North Clark and the Chicago Board of Elections office at 69 West Washington were up and running today. Those are the only two places Chicagoans can go for now to vote early. They're open 7 days a week through November 7th, and then early vote sites in each of the 50 wards open up on October 24th. And today, Chicago elections officials reminded voters that they have a few weeks left to order their mail-in ballots.
Voters have until November 3rd to apply to vote by mail, although we do recommend please do it ahead of time. Voters who are already receiving their ballot, can take their time at home and to vote, but we do recommend earlier the better.
A suburban congressman reveals details about his 17-year-old daughter's tragic, untimely death that happened in June. Congressman Sean Casten says his daughter Gwen died of a sudden cardiac arrhythmia. He says that nobody knows what caused the event and says his daughter was healthy, happy, and fully vaccinated from COVID at the time. She died in her sleep after coming home from spending time with friends. Casten is running for re-election in the 6th Congressional District against Republican Keith Pekow. Some key participants in the Chicago Marathon appeared at a news conference today as race officials worked to drum up some buzz for Sunday's big event. The annual Chicago Marathon kicks off in Grant Park Sunday morning. First wave of runners will sprint out of the gate at 7:30, and as most of you know, the course is flat and relatively fast compared to other city courses around the world, which always spurs talk of possible marathon world record times.
This is a continuation of the Abbott World Marathon Majors, so the performances we saw in Berlin and London, I think, energizes our field, and I think everyone's in the mindset that they want to go fast. The weather looks accommodating.
The mayor and community leaders in the South Side Auburn Gresham neighborhood broke ground on a major city-assisted development. A vacant former furniture store on 79th will soon be transformed into a so-called healthy lifestyle hub featuring a restaurant, cafe, bank branch, and culinary training center. This is thanks to the city-funded Invest Southwest initiative. The mayor says the initial plans were for the bulk of the project to be affordable residential units, but those plans changed once the mayor and her team heard the concerns of the community.
We need food. We need healthy options. We need health care, yes, but we need to make sure that our people have the ability to access healthy food. And that was an important lesson for us to understand. You can't go in a community and think you know. You have to go in a community and listen to what the people who are here know.
And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Laura Washington, political columnist of the Chicago Tribune, Dan Mihalopoulos, investigative reporter on WBEZ's Government and Politics team, Craig Dellamore, political editor at WBBM News Radio, and Maggie Hendricks, writer for Bally Sports. I can't tell you how excited I am to have you all here in the flesh, in person, for the first time in 2.5 years in our brand new studio. Let's get right to it. So, at last night's televised debate between the candidates for Illinois governor, the L word took center stage. Take a look.
Governor Pritzker's obviously lying about everything that he just said.
It's just a lie what Darren Bailey is saying.
Every word that comes out of this man's mouth is deception. JB's an arrogant liar.
Well, over and over again, you've heard Darren Bailey lie just for the last 10 minutes of this debate. And I have to say that he's following in the footsteps of the person he begged for an endorsement from, and that's Donald Trump.
So, Craig Dellamore, other than the fact that both candidates think each other a liar, did voters learn anything new from this debate?
I don't think they really learned anything new, although they did learn that that Darren Bailey believes he can't do anything about abortion, despite saying we are finally going to solve this this abortion thing. And when he's called on it, he says, well, the state has the most permissive abortion laws in the country, and I couldn't change them if I could.
I couldn't change them if I could. Right, yes. right. Maybe he meant to put a W instead of a C in front of that word. And I want to get into their positions on abortion, but Maggie Hendricks, this is only one of 2 debates they're going to be doing. Is this a disservice to voters, or do these debates really not have the impact that they used to?
I don't feel like you're learning anything about them that you couldn't end up reading somewhere. Or I don't really, and all you're hearing is them yelling at each other. So, I mean, if you're not actually saying how you feel about a particular issue, then what's the point? I don't even know what the point of the second one is.
All right, and yeah, go ahead, Laura.
The challenge is that they're politicians, so they don't want to answer any questions. They don't want to get into details, so they're going to get them into trouble. We also learned that J.B. Pritzker wants to fix or what he says is clarify the Safety Act, the very controversial legislation that Republicans are saying is creating more crime, or is going to create more crime, but he wouldn't be pinned down on what those clarifications would be or how he would fix it. And this is what the kind of things that voters are looking for. They want to hear, what are you going to do specifically? And I think on both sides, there was not a lot of new specifics.
And Dan Mihalopoulos, Darren Bailey would stand the most to gain from something like this, since most polls have him down by a lot. Did he make any inroads by landing some hits on Governor Pritzker?
Possibly, but probably not, in the sense that, you know, the state is a pretty blue state, and the reason that Pritzker is trying to link his opponent to Trump is not only because he was endorsed right before the primary, when it was obvious that he was going to win by Trump, but also Trump was not popular here. Trump lost the state by 1 million votes to Joe Biden 2 years ago. He lost it twice. So there's a clear contrast, though, here on a lot of issues, that if people are not tuned in as much as we are as journalists and people who are more tuned to civic life, people are just tuning in and they want to look at this. You see clear contrast on abortion, on guns, on labor rights. There's a big vote coming up on labor.
Stay in their lane.
Stay in your lane, and the Safety Act too as well. And so what he was trying to portray there was, hey folks, things are bad in the quote-unquote hellhole of Chicago, and the same thing's going to happen in the rest of the state, in the suburban swing areas, in the downstate areas that are more Republican when this law goes into effect. We'll see what changes are made to it as well.
That seems to have been a core message. So on those issues, let's look at what they both had to say on abortion.
Darren Bailey wants to eliminate a woman's right to choose. He wants to take away women's reproductive rights.
You are so divisive on everything you say.
That is precisely what he stands for.
Illinois has the most permissive abortion laws in the nation. Nothing's going to change when I'm governor. I couldn't change them if I could.
Craig Dellamore, this is the quote you brought up. We know that Bailey is adamantly pro-life, and his message now is, well, I'm pro-life, but there's nothing I can really do because it's a Democratic legislature. Is that the kind of message that assuages some of those middle-of-the-road voters?
I don't know that it is, because clearly it's something that he wants to do but can't. I don't know if telling people, I really want to do the things I promised you I was going to do, but I can't do them, is necessarily a strong message. But on the other hand, if you are pro-life, you know this is a blue state, you know this is a pro-choice state, you weren't really expecting that he was going to be able to do anything. The important thing for Bailey is to not lose any ground and to be at least seen on the same stage as the governor. So to that extent, maybe he got more out of this than the governor did. But I don't think, again, that it was, landing on any big punches.
But I agree with that, but his messaging is also challenging because he's basically saying, I can't get anything done because we have a Democratic legislature. Well, then what are you going to do when you get into office with a Democratic legislature? That's not going to, we're not going to turn red overnight in the legislature. So how are you going to get anything done?
Doesn't the base want to hear, you're going to work to try and get something done?
Right, but then the Democrats are going to remind everyone of Bruce Rauner and how Bruce Rauner came in and, all fire and brimstone attacking Democrats, that he was going to change the world, and he couldn't work with the legislature, and he couldn't get anything done.
But this is not the primary. The base knows what Darren Bailey is. They favored him overwhelmingly in the primary, surprisingly, partly because J.B. Pritzker put money in to make sure that he would be his opponent, too. Let's not forget that. But he overcame some significant interests, centrist interests in his own party, have left the mainstream, the old line Republicans marooned with no place to go in this state. And so he comes into a situation where he's talking to a different audience now. He has a different electorate in the general election. He hasn't played to it as much as you would think somebody should do that. He hasn't shifted as much as he would if he really wanted to win this election, frankly. But he punted a lot of times. I mean, he punted on assault weapons. He punted on arming teachers. He's against
we should
banning
mention
assault weapons.
He owns a private school where the teachers are armed, or school staff is armed. So he was asked, is that what you want for schools throughout the state of Illinois, to have armed staff members?
Right, and he said it's up to the General Assembly. Well, here's a lesson for you on government that we learned, I think, in junior high. In my case, when George Ryan came to visit us as Secretary of State 40-some years ago. What you learn is, yes, the General Assembly does have to vote, but the governor has to sign that bill or veto it. And come on, what do you stand for? We know.
All right, well, let's see where they stand on the issue of the Safety Act that we just talked about.
Now, the criminal justice system that Darren Bailey and Republicans are standing up for is one that allows murderers and rapists and domestic abusers to buy their way out of jail.
The Safety Act must be repealed because it lets violent criminals and murderers out of jail before trial.
All right, so this is a message that Republicans have really hammered on the issue of crime, although a WGN poll found that it wasn't one of the top issues that voters care about. Do you think they're making inroads focusing on this issue?
I think they want to. I would think they want to continue to do this thing of like, look how terrible Chicago is, and we don't want to be like the rest of the world, but we don't want the rest of Illinois to become like Chicago. But I don't think voters care about that as much as we keep hearing. Everybody I'm talking to, there's a lot other things that are on their plate, and quite frankly, the woman's right to choose is at the top of that list.
It seemed to poll higher than crime, at least on that WGN poll. But Craig Dellamore, even Democrats, even the governor, has acknowledged that that Safety Act, and the main thing it does is eliminates cash bail starting in January, that act needs to be re-looked at, or at least tweaked. What do you think they're going to do about it? Because the governor was asked many times what needs to be tweaked, and he didn't really answer it specifically.
And I don't think he can, and it's only because the kind of technical changes that are going to be necessary to make that act work the way it's exactly supposed to are going to have to be worked out by people who frankly know a lot more about the law than J.B. Pritzker does. But it has to do with what kind of exceptions might be made and how easily judges will have the information they need to be able to hold someone, because the aim of it is that any time someone is brought before a judge, that judge can say, or prosecutors can say, but this person is dangerous, here's his record. And the judge has the authority to hold a person. The lack of cash bail is the cash isn't the issue. The issue is whether the person is kept in jail or not. If the judge says this person should be held, he is held without bail.
And that's true now.
Yes,
it
exactly.
doesn't make any difference what the Safety Act says,
right?
Correct? And I think that's a big misunderstanding out there.
But that's where the dispute is because Republicans are saying, well, save for just a few serious felonies, you can't hold someone in jail at all, which is not true because you could. The law says you have to have that extra custody hearing where you've got to prove to the judge that this person should not be let out. So is that what has to change, or do the mechanics around that have to be clarified?
Yeah, I think the mechanics have to be clarified because people who are a flight risk can be held. People who have a history of violence can be held. And there's one other, and I'm forgetting it right now, the one other element, but any of those three can disqualify them. But the question is, should certain crimes like retail theft be just you shouldn't be able to keep them, and that there'll be some debates. Some of those crimes, kidnapping, there's some argument about whether someone who is accused of kidnapping, and again, accused is the word, they haven't been convicted, can be held because of that. But
and there's also trespassing is another big issue.
Yes, trespassing is another issue.
Whether or not someone could be arrested or removed from someone's property.
And that's another one where there's a lot of misinformation, and that's the problem.
Yeah, and there are a lot of prosecutors, state's attorneys that are concerned, although there was an interesting op-ed by the Lake County state's attorney saying, look, this is coming in January. We've got to get our prosecutors ready to be able to argue these cases. I mean, is that a sound position?
Everybody wants their job to be easier. We all do. But they have to show why people need to be kept, and you know, I think that hasn't changed, as Laura says. I think there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation being pumped out there in our mailboxes and fake newspapers that we get, and the thing they're trying to convince you is that, you know, it'll be a revolving door. People will just come in and out. If you don't have cash bail anymore, there'll be 10 cities because of the trespassing part of it.
By the way, those fake newspapers, the parent company, the Daily Herald, got some grief because they were using their printing press and distribution network to distribute them. These are campaign mailers disguised as newspapers. So Dan Proft, the person behind them, took them to Gannett, another giant news organization that's distributing them. What do you make of the owner of the USA Today basically distributing fake newspapers?
They're getting paid to do it, and they have a printing press, and they want it to spin, and they want to get paid for that. And you know, I think that the Paddock publications, who own the Daily Herald, did a disservice to the journalists there at their publication, who have never been particularly a progressive or left-wing newspaper, to put it lightly. But really did a disservice to the journalists there by publishing misinformation that undermines this whole industry. Gannett is also not a company, although it's deeply invested in communities across the Midwest and across the country. USA Today, it's not a company that's known for really doing things except if they affect their bottom line. They've cut a lot of journalists.
And we should note that, I mean, these are separate divisions of these companies, or that's what those companies would argue. I got to move on to some city news. On Monday, Mayor Lightfoot unveiled her $16.4 billion budget proposal, having dropped an inflation-linked property tax hike. Here's some of what she said.
Budgets are not just math problems. They are and must be value statements. Value statements about how and why we invest, and importantly in this city, where we invest.
No big cuts, Craig Dellamore, no tax hikes. That property tax hike is gone. Why is it that in an election year it always seems like there's enough money for everybody and things are going great?
Well, usually they have to engineer this. In some cases, this year, some things fell into the mayor's lap. One is that because of the recovery money from the federal government, the city is in better shape than it could have been before. And the second thing that was really unexpected, literally unexpected, was the increase in revenue, that is tax revenue and the like, coming in because the economy is coming back faster than anyone estimated.
And the real estate market. I mean, that real estate transfer tax is the big pot.
Right. So when you've got all of that happening, you can get through things a lot easier. This is a relatively easy budget. The biggest concern right now for a lot of the aldermen has to do with vacancies in the city and the fact that the police department is understaffed.
Does this mean that the hammer's going to drop on next year's budget because things are so great now and we can afford all the things we want to afford?
Well, you know, look, something that hasn't been solved is the pension situation. So we're looking at a budget, $16.4 billion, $2 billion or so from the feds, $2.34 billion for pensions out of that $16.4 billion.
An extra $200 million payment above what they owe, which fiscal watchdogs will say, good move.
Long range, it's a good move, but you know, how many people in an election year want them spending another $200 million than they have to on something that's not something that they can see in their neighborhood?
So that, I mean, that tells me that wasn't a political decision. That was a decision made.
It was a fiscal,
based on the fiscal health decision.
And a really good fiscal decision, too.
People,
the rare smart
mayor 10, 20 years down the road might thank this mayor for doing that.
Yes, because it hasn't like an out year benefit of something like $2 billion.
Right.
So, yeah.
It compounds over the life of, but we should still mention these pensions still are in a lot of trouble. Laura Washington, alder people, they're going out on their re-election campaigns. They're getting signatures and stuff. Are they going to pass this budget, or is the mayor going to have some kind of problem?
I think there's going to be some tweaking and behind-the-scenes negotiating, but I think that this is a pretty good budget from their perspective because there's not any significant tax increase, because there's going to be so much in the way of social services. I think a lot of the progressive aldermen don't think it's going to be enough money for social services, but they never think that. So I think she's probably got the votes to pass this.
I would think that might be something that they talk about and maybe as a block vote against, but in numbers, it's still not enough to overcome the potential positive votes that she's going to have for this. Amid this, the CTU endorses a candidate for mayor that hasn't actually declared. His name is Brandon Johnson. He is a CTU organizer, staff member, also a Cook County commissioner. Does this mean that Chuy Garcia has kind of lost out? They supported him last time.
Yeah. I don't think so, but the real question is whether Chuy Garcia is going to get in. He has been walking a very fine tightrope because he'll say, I'm thinking about it, however, the job I have is really good, and this is a key time for Democrats in the House, and so I have to really think whether I want to leave my key role. And
although he will very likely be out of the majority come January in Congress.
The job he has is really good, and you're scratching your head when you're wondering why would he want to take this step away from, I think what was originally was his dream job to represent his community in Congress, to go to inherit a nightmare job in City Hall. So a lot of people are thinking that this is something he's probably leaning away from. The challenge he has, too, is that he can't do anything until after the November election. He's standing for re-election to Congress. How does it look for him to be running campaign for mayor when he's also running for Congress?
And then he'll have about 3 weeks to go out, get 12,500 petition signatures, and then file, which
a lot more than that.
And 40,000.
It's going to be a challenge.
He should be able to do, but as a voter in Chicago, I want somebody who's like, right now, I want this job. This is how I'm going to take over. This is what I'm going to do.
So maybe he's already kind of lost a lot of votes by maybe kind of hemming and hawing a little bit. Do you think he gets in?
I want him to want it.
Just personally, and he'll probably get mad at me for saying this, I think he's better suited as a legislator than as an executive, perhaps. I don't mean it in any insulting way, but you know, there was a situation where he made the runoff against Rahm Emanuel, what was it, 8 years ago?
Right.
And you know, he didn't really have a clear plan in the runoff either. Who's going to support him or who's not going to support him? They could shift if we get into a runoff situation again. But he does need a good base, and the CTU is somebody that, you know, they haven't elected. They're a big group, but they haven't elected a mayor either.
But they supported Reckwinkle last time, and that didn't really help her very much. All right, let's move over to sports. So with the White Sox, Tony La Russa made a statement this week, kind of mea culpa, saying, yeah, we underperformed. I'm the one to blame. Is he solely responsible for the disappointment this year?
No, I think Jerry Reinsdorf is very much as much culpable as Tony La Russa is, because he was the one that had to say, oh, I need to right this wrong when I fired a guy that I shouldn't have.
40 years ago.
40 years ago, bring somebody back who hasn't been part of the game when you have this young, exciting team, and he can't connect with them. He can't motivate them. So I think it's both of their fault. But I mean, yeah, Tony La Russa took the job and thought he could do it and clearly couldn't.
But I think a lot of observers think more needs to change than just the manager. I mean, are there any other moves in the offseason the team's going to make?
I think we're going to see a lot of moves. The big question to me is if Jose Abreu is going to continue to play. He's getting up there, and he definitely was holding on to play with this team. So, you know, yeah, I don't think Jerry Reinsdorf's loyalty is sometimes a problem. And he has been very loyal to Rick Hahn, and I don't see that changing.
All right, so then on that note, Ozzie Guillen is someone who has said, no one knows more about this organization than me. Bring me back. Is there any chance they do that?
I don't think so. As much as I would love it, because it would be so entertaining. But, I mean, you know we always get a good quote out of Ozzie. It's always going to be great. But I think that particular relationship, it's not severed exactly, but, like, it's just not what it was. And I also see the smart move for the White Sox would be to go follow in the footsteps of the other teams that have hired players who are recently out of the game and have really turned things around. When you have this team needs somebody they can connect with, and I think
that's what Rick Hahn, the general manager, wanted to do the first time around before Jerry Reinsdorf got involved. So who is that person then?
I mean, I've seen so many good options, and of course, all of the names are falling out of my head at the moment. But I would just like to see somebody who is recently out of game. But at the same time, Miguel Cairo, I thought, also did a very good job.
It seemed that there was a different spark under them.
Yeah, they just looked like they were ready to play. So I think that was a thing. And I think it's also important to consider a coach who is bilingual or who is at least more comfortable with Spanish, because this is a bilingual team, and the
majority of the players are Spanish speaking.
Absolutely, and they have a better time connecting with somebody who can speak their language.
Well,
like
although
literally.
La Russa did speak Spanish. He was a Spanish speaker. I got to ask you about the Bears. That was woeful. I know. We were having so much fun. But you know, Justin Fields did have his best game last week, so that's a positive. Should fans maybe think, okay, maybe he's taken some baby steps to improve, although he's got nothing around him.
He's got nothing around him, and that's the thing that I keep returning to. And what concerns me about Justin Fields is not Justin Fields. It's the Bears not putting anything around him, not giving him better receivers, not giving him an offensive line that's going to keep him safe. Because when you run as much as he does and like improvise and stuff, you need a line that holds, and he doesn't have it.
And we're looking at a defense here. They can't stop the run either.
No, and they're not going to have an easy time on Sunday against the Vikings in Minnesota. So, yeah, there's a lot to be pessimistic about with the Bears, unfortunately.
All right, well, there's a lot to be optimistic about because we are in our new studio. We have you all here in person. How do you think it went, the first run?
It's like we never left.
This is the way it's supposed to be, and we are out of time, so our thanks to Laura Washington, Dan Mihalopoulos, Maggie Hendricks, and Craig Delamore. Thank you all so much.
Thank
you.
And that is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And be sure to join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. Then immediately after that, Chicago Tonight Black Voices at 6:30. And then we're back at 7 o'clock all next week right here. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.
Meet Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony winner Rita Moreno, who found her good times after difficult ones.
I was treated like a sex object.
Look for Rita Moreno, just a girl who decided to go for it.
Unspeakably exciting.
On American Masters.
Tonight at 8 on WTTW.
Have you entered the WTTW Great Treasure Hunt Sweepstakes? Choose your own Caribbean getaway with a 7-night all-inclusive stay for 2 from Apple Travel and Riu Hotels and Resorts. Set off to sun-drenched, amenity-packed destinations in Cancun, the Riviera Maya, Costa Mujeres, or Aruba. Your choice. Or maybe your wardrobe will get a serious upgrade with a brand new pair of handcrafted Lucchese boots from Alcala's Western Wear. The expertly crafted Baron boots are made from the most premium leather to provide unparalleled durability and comfort. But you need to enter to win. Visit WTTW.com/sweepstakes today.
Watch me. Watch me jump, dive, and splash. Put me by a pool, I'll be soaked in a flash. A girl in the water to swim like a fish. Just 2 simple legs, that was my wish. I'm a sea turtle, shark, a seal on a slide. This is my day of fun, with nothing to hide. Watch me. Pioneers in orthotic and prosthetic technology at Shriners Children's. The most amazing care anywhere.
Today's wild adventure is tomorrow's forever memory. Brookfield Zoo. Wildly surprising.
Bring your ghosts and goblins to Boo at the Zoo, Saturdays and Sundays, October 8th to the 23rd.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
Sunday on PBS. Secrets of the Dead, Archaeology of Althorpe.
I think somewhere like this is a time capsule, and who knows what's underneath. We've never had an archaeological dig here.
And the season finale of Vandervalk on Masterpiece.
All of us are targets. They'll stop at nothing.
Neither will we. Secrets of the Dead, Archaeology of Althorpe, and the season finale of Vandervalk on Masterpiece.
I am Juan. You are watching WTTW.
Armageddon, allegations, and arguments. After Russian threats, President Biden issues a stark warning. For the first time in decades, the world risks nuclear Armageddon. Meanwhile,
I never asked anyone to get an abortion. I never paid for an abortion, and it's a lie. And I'm going to continue to fight.
Herschel Walker, Georgia's Republican Senate candidate, responds to allegations that he paid for an ex-girlfriend to have an abortion.
Don't lie about your life at the expense of me, my mom. You don't get to pretend you're some moral family guy.
And accusations of domestic violence.
Mandela Barnes, dangerously liberal on crime.
And Republicans step up their claims that Democrats are to blame for spikes in crime. Plus, the Supreme Court returns, hearing landmark cases. Next.
This is Washington Week. Corporate funding is provided by Consumer Cellular. Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan through the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again from Washington, moderator Yamiche Alcindor.
Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. This was a busy week, and we have a lot to get to. And here's where we start. Last night, President Biden issued a stark warning. He said because of Russia's recent military setbacks in Ukraine and threats by President Putin, global nuclear risk is higher at this point than in decades. The president reportedly told a small group of donors, quote, "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis." Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Jonathan Lemire, White House Bureau Chief for Politico and host of MSNBC's Way Too Early. And joining me here in studio, Claudia Grisales, Congressional Correspondent for NPR, Sungmin Kim, White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Ariane DeVoe, Supreme Court reporter for CNN. Thank you all for being here. Jonathan, I'm going to go to you. Take us inside President Biden's thinking here. What he's saying privately about the nuclear threats coming out of Russia.
Well, certainly he surprised a lot of people last night with those very stark comments delivered at a fundraiser in New York City. And he's not wrong, I suppose, that this is the closest we've been to such an unthinkable outcome. But U.S. officials were quick today to perhaps clarify what the president said. He was trying to suggest this was the arc of the conflict here, that yes, at this moment, Vladimir Putin is cornered, the war effort by the Russians not going well. U.S. officials are concerned how he may lash out if the defeats continue to mount. But there's been no sign, U.S. intelligence officials stress this, no sign of any change to Moscow's nuclear posture. No sign that Putin is more likely to launch a weapon like that, even a smaller tactical version, now than he was at the beginning of the conflict, and NATO intelligence tends to agree. So this is a moment, though, where the president is trying to continue to keep the allies rallied behind Ukraine and underscore the threat that Russia continues to pose. As Europe is about to head into, it is likely a long, dark, cold winter, deprived of a lot of Russian energy sources. It could put a strain on the alliance. And right now, the Ukrainians' counteroffensive going well. It's been a shocking success. And the president is simply saying that this is something that the U.S. officials continue to be worried about, but there's no sign right now of Putin, at least not yet, willing to escalate things and take such a drastic step.
And you make the important point that U.S. officials say, Jonathan, that there's no fresh intelligence. How does that square with what President Biden is saying? Could his comments possibly be seen as making things even more tense with Russia or having any sort of negative impact?
Well, there have been a few times now where the president has said something and White House officials have had to quickly clarify it or sort of walk it back a little. But I do think this one is one where the president is trying to keep focus on just how important the stakes are here. That yes, that Ukraine is doing well, but the Americans and therefore our Western alliance, our allies, shouldn't be complacent, that this is still a threat, and that Biden was simply trying to sort of trace the arc of this conflict and sort of put it in historical context. And he is, in a way, right. Outside of a few maybe flashpoints in the 1980s, this probably is the closest the world has been to some sort of nuclear explosion. But the U.S. officials have also made very clear to Putin directly that if he were to do this, there would be catastrophic consequences for Moscow. Doesn't mean that the U.S. would unleash a nuke in return, but there were ways to deliver, whether it's a cyber attack or more conventional warfare. We've seen the weakness of the Russian military. The U.S. military would probably roll through that. No one wants that, of course, but I think there's a bit of a warning to what the president said as well.
Certainly. And Sungmin, the President Biden told donors, quote, "I'm trying to figure out what is Putin's off-ramp. Where does he find a way out?" What are you hearing about President Biden's thinking here and whether the U.S. thinks Russia does have an off-ramp here?
Well, the White House officials were actually asked about that today in her gaggle with reporters on the president's trip to Hagerstown, Maryland. You know, what does he mean by an off-ramp? Or is the administration looking to do some sort of an agreement with Putin here? But we didn't really get any clear answers on that. I do think it is just remarkable what he said, because this is the starkest warning, sort of the most unvarnished warnings that we had gotten from some time from President Biden on this.
It is a very, very stark warning and really sort of unusual for him. Of course, like I said, there's a lot going on. So I'm going to also now pivot to the other thing that's been top of mind, and that is that election day, midterm election day, is just 32 days away, and several key Senate races are heating up. In Georgia, there was an October surprise. Herschel Walker, the Republican Senate candidate, is now fighting accusations of hypocrisy after campaigning on family values and against abortion, without exceptions for rape or incest. This week, in interviews with the Daily Beast and the New York Times, a woman who says she is the mother of one of Herschel Walker's children said he paid for her to have an abortion when she was pregnant with his child in 2009. Walker's son, Christian, a conservative social media influencer, also accused his father of domestic violence, including threatening to kill him and his mother. Herschel Walker is calling all of these allegations a, quote, lie. Take a listen to what he told me when I was reporting in Georgia. What's your reaction to people so close to you saying don't trust you?
Well, just like what I just said, the Democrats are desperate for this seat. This seat is important.
But your family.
They're very desperate for this seat. I love my family. I always love my family. I'm going to win this race.
I'm going to win this race. That's what Herschel Walker's sticking to. Meanwhile, in battleground states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, Republicans are on the offense, filling airwaves with ads attacking Democrats as soft on crime. Claudia, first of all, thanks for being here. It's your Washington Week debut. I'm very happy to have you here. There's a lot going on in Georgia. I mean, there's just so much going on in Georgia. I was talking to voters, and while this is sort of making waves, people are in their camps. I had a Republican woman tell me, even if these are true, even if all of this is believable, she's still voting for Herschel Walker because he's an opponent of abortion rights now. What do you make of how this is playing out and what it says about sort of where we are right now?
Right. We are in a very different place. Previously, a report like this could sink a candidate's campaign, but we're not seeing that right now. As you heard when you were in Georgia, that they're very loyal in terms of what party they're following. Even if you have a bombshell of a story come out like this October surprise for Walker, it's not going to deter some of these voters who are very loyal to their party. At the same time, there could be some voters on the fence in Georgia who are thinking, maybe I'm not so motivated to go out and vote for Walker at this point, or a Democrat that's more energized now to vote against him. So it's tricky times, but in terms of making predictions, as we did in the old days of saying this would sink a campaign, that may not be the case.
And Jonathan, tricky times is the way that Claudia is describing the political moment that we're all living through. Now, it's interesting because while national Republicans are sticking with Herschel Walker, at least there's some daylight there with state Republicans. The Georgia lieutenant governor saying even the staunchest Republicans are rattled by what they saw, saying that the baggage might be unbearable. What do you make of how this is playing out and what it means for sort of midterm politics overall?
Yeah, the Georgia lieutenant governor, a Republican, been sort of a lone voice, though, in suggesting that the moment was too big for Walker and that, yes, he was not perhaps a qualified candidate. It was only on the ballot because he scored a bunch of touchdowns for the University of Georgia. When Walker, as you know, was asked to respond, he didn't know who lieutenant governor was, which goes to show perhaps his political acumen. But largely Republicans are rallying around Walker. Republican voters, too, those you spoke to, but also Walker's seen a huge surge in donations this week since these stories came out. And he's gone on the offensive. He's put out an attack ad claiming that his opponent, Democrat Senator Reverend Warnock, is misrepresenting Walker's record. That's not the case either. But I think what we're seeing, though, is a natural narrowing of these races here. Polls have tightened. They've tightened in Georgia. They've tightened in Pennsylvania. We have close races in Wisconsin, Ohio. Arizona's only a few points. It's a 50-50 Senate right now, and Democrats felt really good most of the summer with the winds at their backs. A lot of legislation passed. It does feel like, though, Republicans sense that they've got a bit of momentum at the moment as the national conversation turns to, they think, issues that are good for them, mostly inflation, the economy, also crime. I think the only safe prediction here in this tricky moment is that all these races are going to be close, and we're going to have a late election night.
And Sungmin, we covered the former President Trump together. He weathered so many scandals. He sort of, in some ways, has a legacy of you can stick around, don't quit. Wait around, maybe your party will come back around for you. What do you make of sort of what's going on here? It might not, maybe these scandals don't matter as much as they used to.
Well, I think if there is a political lesson, the strategic lesson that the Republican Party learned after 2016 and the Access Hollywood tape is that at this point in the race, when most of the parties, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, are kind of wearing their partisan jerseys and in their partisan corners, you stick by your candidate. If there are claims, you deny them, despite all the evidence that we're seeing otherwise, or the corroboration that we're seeing from other news organizations. Because, you know, A, it's obviously too late in the season to replace them on the ballot. And B, you don't want to risk your base voters punishing you for kind of ditching your candidate at this stage in the game. But I think it's fair to say that Republicans are rattled in the sense that they don't know what's coming next. Obviously, we had another news organization put more light to these allegations from this woman earlier tonight, and we don't know what's going to drop with the Walker campaign over the next days and weeks.
It has been a drip, drip, drip. And you're talking about the New York Times reporting that this woman who said he paid for an abortion tried to get her to abort the child that she ultimately ended up having in 2011. Ariane, I want to bring you in because part of the reason why abortion is such a big topic is because the Supreme Court last term overturned Roe v. Wade. What do you make of the significance of and the role that the Supreme Court is playing in its decisions?
Right. From my perspective, so much of what happened at the Supreme Court last term is playing out now. You talked earlier about crime, the Second Amendment. The court issued that big opinion last year. Just yesterday, a New York court struck down a concealed carry law, and that was and they cited over and over again that Supreme Court decision. And then when you look at the issue of abortion and you see how quickly the landscape changed, how quickly the midterm outlet was definitely changed by that. And you see really how the court that doesn't like to be in the political arena is there. And I think Samuel Alito was interesting last term because he wrote that opinion. And one of the things he said is, look, we're taking abortion out of the legal realm into the political realm. If women want to do something about it, we'll go to vote. Well, Biden, just a few weeks ago, at a campaign event, cites Alito and says, see what Alito said? Women, come out and vote, which is so interesting to see. Alito, the last place he'd want to be, right, is in the middle of a get out the vote speech, and there he was.
It's certainly sort of head spinning in some ways. Jonathan, of course, while Democrats want to talk about abortion, Republicans really want to focus on inflation. This week we saw some news out of OPEC. What's the White House saying about gas prices possibly going up and sort of the impact that they might have on the midterms? Go ahead.
Yeah, they're deeply worried about it, Yamiche. Chief of Staff Ron Klain told me months ago the first thing he does every morning, even before he checks to see if he's heard from the president, is check the price of gas. They know that gasoline is the one consumer item that every American's care how much it costs, in part because we all know what it costs. It's advertised on the side of highways. It's on billboards on every road in America, seemingly. And as though inflation has certainly impacted a lot of consumer goods, gasoline is front of mind. We know the price went down considerably over the summer. It has started to creep back up, and this news from OPEC Plus met with great frustration from the White House. First of all, it is seen as a helping hand to Russia. We just discussed their war effort. We know that the president traveled to Saudi Arabia in July, that infamous fist bump with the controversial Crown Prince, MBS. They feel like, well, what did we get for that? They're angry. In fact, there's members of Congress who are calling about taking stiff action here against Saudi Arabia for doing so. But in terms of electoral terms, gas prices are going to go up. They're going to go up again in these next few weeks. And without fair or not, the party in power tends to pay the price. And that's Democrats. White House not happy.
Definitely not happy about that, the White House. Claudia, I want to bring you in because there's also, of course, these ads that are going out. Republicans are running ads on crime, but they're also targeting the first Latina elected to the Senate, and that, of course, being Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada. You've been doing some reporting about ads and, of course, the significance of the Latino vote here. Talk about what's going on.
Right. She is vulnerable in Nevada. And part of the problem that we're seeing here is that Democrats have long seen Latinos as allies in terms of voters, but a lot of Latino voters are saying, no, you cannot assume we're a monolith, that we're going to be voting for Democrats. Some are frustrated and feel left behind. I did some reporting in Texas earlier this year where I heard from Latino voters who were worried about border issues and immigration. And there was a big warning beginning with Biden's presidency that this president needed to address immigration or they were going to lose Latinos along the way. And immigration has not been addressed, and that's the price they could pay come November. They could lose some of these voters in Nevada and in Texas, for example, that they previously may have enjoyed their support before. So it's a reminder that this is a tough issue for Democrats right now.
And Claudia is talking about the role that President Biden might play. So President Biden in some ways wants to be inserting himself into the midterm race, wants to be helping out. But there are some candidates who are actually trying to avoid him. Talk a little bit about that.
There are many candidates who aren't really eager to see President Biden out on the campaign trail or whatnot. I thought it was really interesting how the Democratic senator from Arizona, Mark Kelly, in his debate last night with Republican Blake Masters, he pushed back several times, particularly particularly on immigration, the immigration policies of this administration. So the White House, President Biden has to find other unique ways to help out Democratic candidates. Obviously, one way is doing a lot of fundraising. He has really picked up the pace of those events over the last several days and weeks. And other is just kind of doing official events, doing official actions that are, they aren't political, but also they are kind of helpful to these candidates at home. We had President Biden travel to New York yesterday. Part of his travel was the fundraisers that made so much news last night, but also was to tout the benefits of his semiconductor law, the CHIPS law, and touting jobs and investment in New York. Some House candidates, some targeted by Republicans, showed up for that as well. So you see how the White House has to be very careful and deliberate in a political environment where, while President Biden's approval ratings had been ticking upward a little bit, he is still significantly underwater, especially in these key states.
Well, when talking about sort of underwater and perception, that brings us in some ways to the Supreme Court, which is also having its own sort of perception issues. This week, the Supreme Court began its new term featuring several high-profile cases. On Tuesday, the justices heard oral arguments for Merrill v. Milligan. The plaintiffs are arguing that Alabama's new congressional map dilutes the voting power of Black residents. Here is Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first Black woman on the court, who made her debut this week, talking about the case.
It became clear to me that the framers themselves adopted the Equal Protection Clause in a race-conscious way, that they were, in fact, trying to ensure that the freedmen during the Reconstruction period were actually brought equal to everyone else in the society.
Conservative Justice Samuel Alito also weighed in.
They're not going to win on whether the majority votes as a bloc, which may be due to ideology and not have anything to do with race. It may be that Black voters and white voters prefer different candidates now because they have different ideas about what the government should do.
Quite an experience to be able to hear those oral arguments. I might as well just call this part of the show the Ariana Vogue show, because clearly you're the expert at the table. So I'll just ask you, what are the most important cases coming out of the Supreme Court, especially as we think about everyday Americans' lives?
Well, it was so interesting to hear her there because, usually when a justice starts on the court, they want to show that they know what they're doing. And they ask a few questions. She actually dominated those arguments there. That was what was interesting. She went on and on and on, and she knows she has these conservative colleagues, and you saw that clip there. What was interesting is she saw her conservative colleagues who believe in originalism, right? And she's making an originalism argument there. She's saying, don't talk to me about how these maps have to be race neutral, when in fact, look at the 14th Amendment. They took race into consideration there. It was so fascinating to see her trying to take that away. So we do have these big cases coming. We've got this, we've already had that one, the Section 2 case. And then there's another case that's infused with race, again this term, and that has to do with affirmative action. In fact, there's two disputes. Court precedent says, remember, that you can take race in consideration as a factor in admissions, but now a conservative group is coming to the court and saying, we don't want you to take race you can't look at race at all, otherwise you're violating the Constitution. So once again, this court is being asked to look at an overturned precedent, as we saw last term. There's another interesting voting rights case, and it comes from supporters of Trump who want the court to adopt this obscure legal theory that basically says that state courts cannot play a role when they're looking at laws passed by state legislatures when it comes to federal elections. And what that would mean, critics feel, is that state legislatures could go rogue. They could pass whatever they wanted to, and the state courts couldn't stop them. And right now, most of the state legislatures are controlled by Republicans. So there's a real fear among supporters of voting rights about where this case could go. There's also a really important LGBTQ case coming up, again, pitting those rights, gay rights, against claims of religious liberty. That's going to be a hot button topic. But it was so fascinating to see that Justice Jackson is going to take over this term that is so infused with race, handling these these cases. And she started out there, she was at ease, she was confident, and she was super aggressive.
And I was texting to someone, I call them her group chat, some of her friends that I've now sourced up, and they were saying, yeah, this is who we know, this is our friend, she's going to speak up. Ariane, I want to ask you, because again, this is your part of the show, the Supreme Court term, it started with its lowest approval rating in modern history. How aware are the justices of the perception of the court? How does that factor in at all to just their thinking about their jobs?
Well, it's so interesting because over the summer, usually when a Supreme Court justice gives a speech over the summer, there's not a lot of meat there. This summer, we saw a squabble. We saw the liberals, Justice Elena Kagan saying, whoa, you know, a court can no longer be considered legitimate, right, if you're doing things like overturning precedent and not fully explaining why, or if you're straying from your commitment to a certain judicial philosophy. That's a problem. And she kept saying, I'm not talking about any cases or controversies directly, but of course she was, because that's what she said all along. And then you had Chief Justice John Roberts come forward and say, whoa, whoa. You can't talk about the legitimacy of the court just because you don't like the opinions that are coming out. And Justice Alito, who you saw there, he also jumped in. They know that the legitimacy of the court is so important. They never want to be looked at as another political branch for the simple reason is that they want, when they issue opinions, they want the public to follow them and not think, oh, this is just politics. We'll wait for another politicians to get on the bench. They're very concerned about it. They know about this approval rating, but I'm not sure they know how to conquer it. Yeah. Right.
And one last question here. We have about a minute left. President Trump, he's gone to the Supreme Court to ask them to basically revoke the DOJ from having access to these classified documents that were seized from his home. What's the latest there, and what kind of politics are going on there?
Well, that's so interesting, right? So there, Trump draws the Supreme Court. It's starting a new term. It's trying to be afresh. It's drawn into this white-hot fight. Actually, it's a narrow dispute because Trump isn't looking for relief that would deal with the criminal justice probe that's going on. He was clear. He's not asking for relief there. What he's asking for is that special master cannot get the chance to see about 100 of those documents that were seized that were marked classified. That's the issue before the court. It's kind of technical. Did the lower court do things right? But again, you know, we've seen another document case around documents last term, and Trump lost badly there, except for Justice Clarence Thomas, who ruled in his favor. So now it doesn't feel like that they're going to give him relief. They'll probably deny it. But at the same time, they're being dragged in, the political spotlight's on them, the term's beginning, and this will probably be resolved sometime next week. It's just where they don't want to be.
It's not where they want to be, but it's exactly where they found themselves. So we're going to have to continue to watch that. Thank you for coming on and breaking all that down. And thanks to our panelists for joining us and for sharing your reporting. And before we go, tune in Saturday to PBS News Weekend. After changes this week in the global oil market, they'll look at what's ahead for Americans at the gas pump. Now, Jonathan did tell us the gas prices are already going up, but check it out on Saturday. And thank you for joining us. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week is provided by...
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular has been offering no-contract wireless plans designed to help people do more of what they like. Our U.S.-based customer service team can help find a plan that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewens with the Ewen Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
watching PBS.